Hey guys, tonight we step into the damp darkness of the Tower of London, where the chilling breaths of severed skulls once echoed, and strange sounds linger like an unrelenting curse. Picture each drop of night mist trailing down the ancient stone walls, moonlight filtering through the iron bars, revealing secrets buried deep below. Believe me, you won't be able to withstand the horror that awaits. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. In 1793, amidst the tense atmosphere of the French Revolution, a woman named Charlotte Corday was led to the guillotine for the murder of Jean-Paul Marat. A crowd gathered in the square, lantern light glinting off pools of blood and ashes of cries. When the razor-sharp blade swept across Corday's neck, our horrifying spectacle unfolded. François Launay, the executioner, lifted her head and slapped both cheeks. Witnesses tremblingly recalled that Corday's face spasmed. Her lips pressed together, then suddenly parted as if struggling to utter a final word, while her cheeks flushed as though a furious flame still burned beneath the skin. The screams, the metallic scent of blood, and the crowd's stunned silence created an unforgettable chaos. In fact, the phenomenon of a living severed head was not rare in the chronicles. From ancient Rome through the mid-18th century, numerous medical texts and military accounts report decapitated heads glancing around, lips twitching, even eyes blinking in time with breath. Physicians of the era, unaware of reflexive neural activity, believed such signs indicated lingering consciousness, as if part of the soul had not yet departed the body. Whenever someone dared to experiment raising a head for inspection, slapping its cheeks, or splashing it with cold water, new rumors spread of grotesque expressions, deepening public unease and horror. Among these countless chilling tales, one case was recorded in meticulous detail and remains fiercely debated, that of Anne Boleyn, the second wife of England's Henry VIII. Unlike Corday or other traitors who met the blade, Anne Boleyn's severed head not only was said to have parted lips as though trying to speak, but then inexplicably vanished. No memorial plaque, no wooden spike for display, not even an official grave. Anne Boleyn seemed expunged from all physical records, surviving only in memory and legend. To understand why Anne's story is so singular, we must look back at her origins and role in the Tudor court. Born in the early 1502 into a moderately wealthy but ambitious noble family, her father, Thomas Boleyn, skillfully leveraged diplomatic ties to place his wife and daughters in European courts. As a child, Anne was sent to the Netherlands and then France, where she encountered a very different noble culture, one in which royal women influenced policy and held real power, rather than simply bearing heirs in silence. Those formative years forged in Anne a sharp intellect, confidence, and a thirst for authority that few English women of her time dared to imagine. When she returned to England in 1522, Anne carried with her a new vision of queenship. She refused to be mere ornament to the throne, and instead sought active participation in governance. Her linguistic skills, graceful manners, and grasp of European politics quickly drew the attention of the nobility and the heart of the most powerful monarch in Christendom, Henry VIII. Never before had a king's consort insisted on marriage before intimacy, compelling Henry to divorce Catherine of Aragon to wed her. This bold gambit showcased her political savvy, but also sowed the seeds of her tragic downfall. Anne's fortunes rose further in 1533, when she was crowned queen, triggering England's break with the Roman Church and the foundation of the Church of England. Yet her new status also exposed grave dangers. She earned enemies among conservative nobles and clergy loyal to Rome, who resented a woman steering religious reforms and redistributing monastic wealth to the poor. This hostility set the stage for the plot to unseat her. On 19 May 1536, Anne faced the executioner's block at the Tower of London. The culmination of hatred and intrigue, the French swordsman brought in to be more merciful than the traditional axe, silently drew his blade and severed her head. But rather than resting, that head astonished witnesses. Lips trembled, eyes opened, then closed in a few beats, and its expression seemed to strive to convey something like a lost spirit hovering between life and death. The image haunted all who heard the tale. The scene grew darker still, when Anne Boleyn's head was not displayed on a spike customary for traitors, nor buried with her body in the royal crypt. Records only hint that it vanished without a trace. Someone must have hurriedly collected and concealed it, as if fearing that her final words would unveil a deeper conspiracy, threatening not just her but the very Tudor throne. What secret lay behind those last flickers of awareness? Why was Anne Boleyn's head, despite all evidence of post-decapitation reflexes expunged from the physical record, preserved only in memory and myth? Nearly 500 years have passed, and the question remains unanswered. Though theories abound from Elizabeth I, clandestinely reuniting her mother's head with her body to Cromwell, hiding it as damning proof, they remain conjecture without hard evidence. What is certain is that Anne Boleyn's story transcends personal tragedy to become a dark legacy of power, betrayal, and nameless horror that reverberates through the ages. From the harrowing moments of the first part, when the last drop of blood had scarcely dried on the executioner's block, we turn back the clock to explore the origins of the woman who stood before the blade, Queen Anne Boleyn. Her life began shrouded in mystery from the very moment of her birth, as if to presage that her fate would never leave behind clear, unambiguous traces. The exact year of Anne's birth remains a question that historians continue to debate. Was it 1501 or 1507? This uncertainty is more than a mere number. It is a fateful reminder that even her year of birth was never firmly fixed. Each hypothesis comes accompanied by its own set of arguments and fragmentary evidence from ancient manuscripts, earning Anne the epithet, the girl without a certain memory, from the cradle. That ambiguity shadowed her entire life, suggesting that even her own identity was always in flux and open to question. Anne was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, a merchant of noble lineage who had turned to rope-making for ships. Unlike long-established royal houses, the Boleyn's social standing rested on political ambition. In the 16th century, noble women often served as commodities in family strategies, exchanged for alliances, prestige, and power. Early on, Anne learned the harsh lesson that to survive, she had to be indispensable to those who held real authority, proving her worth beyond the fragility of youthful beauty. At around 12 years old, or possibly even younger, Anne was sent to the Netherlands, a bustling commercial hub, under the patronage of the Duke of Cleves. There, she was a vulnerable child in a perilous political arena, where a single careless word could mean imprisonment or death. That loneliness and the constant threat stalking the palace corridors sharpened Anne's courage and her powers of observation. Night after night, as darkness fell, she would sit silently by a window, gazing toward her distant homeland, and nurturing a burning desire to understand how power truly operated. From the Netherlands, Anne journeyed to France, where she served at the court first of Queen Claude of France and later of Marguerite of Navarre. There, she witnessed royal women who were not mere ornamental consorts but decisive actors in state affairs. They steered diplomatic relations and even influenced alliances among the principalities of Europe. Le Viche-Banquet, closed-door council meetings with dignitaries, strategic discussions over foreign policy, all of these showed Anne a very different model of queenship, one in which women wielded genuine influence when entrusted with authority. By contrast, the role of an English queen at that time was strictly defined: remain silent, bear a male heir, and then retire behind the velvet curtains so that her male descendants could inherit the throne. The image of those muted queens confined to the background stood in stark relief against the powerful French royal women Anne had served. That contrast planted in Anne the vision of a different kind of queenship, one in which a queen's duties extended beyond childbirth to guiding the realm itself. During her years abroad, Anne did more than absorb political knowledge. She honed her language skills, refined her courtly manners, and developed a deep understanding of European culture. She learned how to converse persuasively, build alliances, and exert subtle influence skills that few English women of her time were permitted to acquire, slowly and steadily. Confidence, intelligence, and a keen political vision formed within her, transforming Anne from the Boleyn girl into a woman capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with Europe's greatest nobles. In 1522, Anne returned to England armed with knowledge and ambition. Her refined beauty, self-assured bearing, and continental experience quickly captured the attention of all levels of the aristocracy, including that of the king himself, Henry VIII. Yet it was precisely this new vision, so at odds with the prevailing model of a silent, ornamental queen, that sowed the seeds of latent danger. The very power and autonomy she sought made many of her court rivals feel deeply threatened. Thus, from a child whose birth year remained uncertain to a woman embracing the idea of an engaged, powerful queen, Anne Boleyn painted an entirely new picture of female authority. But the price of that vision, of that ambition, would be the path to an unavoidable tragedy, a tragedy we will explore in the next part. Following her return from distant courts, Anne Boleyn stepped into England with a French breeze that swept away all local constraints. The confidence shining in her eyes seemed to warm the cold stone walls of the Tudor palace. The wind whistling through the window whispered encouragement, "Show your strength, Anne." Yet beneath that glamorous surface, her soul braced for a fierce collision with England's rigid reality, a place where any personal opinion voiced by a woman was deemed a crime. The palace, draped in grey stone with its cavernous corridors and flickering candlelight, allowed no rebellious glance or overly bright smile. Anne felt the oppression keenly. Each footstep echoed like a death knell. She knew that the vivacity, erudition, and independence admired throughout Europe here amounted to a death sentence for women. Her heart pounded. Her breath came fast. Yet in the depths of her gaze lay an unbowed resolve. Anne's first romance with Henry Percy carried the hallmarks of a modern dating horror story, red flags everywhere. Yet she pressed forward. Percy, heir to the Northumberland dukedom, with his rugged charm, had stirred her heart. But deep inside, Anne sensed danger. Watchful eyes whispered rumours behind her back, and the old palace seemed to warn, "This is no place for tender love." When Cardinal Wolsey confronted Anne, he did not speak gently, but struck with the sword of power. Percy was forced into marriage with another woman, and Anne was subjected to public humiliation. In that moment, the palace shook with the mocking laughter of courtiers, sly glances, and whispered taunts. "Your heart, Anne, belongs only to the one who holds the reins." Anne's blood felt frozen. Her heart raced amid the bowing throng. Shame washed over her in a raging tide, and she wanted to collapse, to vanish into the shadows. But in that darkest night, Anne heard her own voice rise. "I was not born to be a puppet." The palace fell silent as she swore to herself that no one would ever use her worth as a political tool. From the depths of her being, she kindled a new flame, a flame of autonomy, a determination to turn humiliation into power. The candlelight dancing on the wooden table seemed to cast rays of hope, lending her newfound strength. That resolve led Anne into an even riskier game, challenging Henry VIII, the king of boundless power and desire. She refused the role of mistress or plaything. Instead, she demanded the title of queen before surrendering what was most sacred. The wind outside the window swept into her chamber as if to soothe. "Hold fast to your value, Anne," she famously declared. "I would rather die than lose my honour." A barrier not only to Henry, but a firm declaration of women's right to self-determination. That strategy only fueled Henry's obsession, used to immediate conquest and indulgence. The king realized Anne was no easy prize. Lavish royal letters poured forth, each word brimming with his desire to win her. Anne read every line with a torn heart, half longing to laugh at the sweetness, half aching to crush the letter in her fingers to affirm her freedom. Day after day, Henry lovey-bombed Anne with extravagant gifts, diamond rings, Italian velvet, priceless pearls. Each present felt like an enticement, a promise of power and prestige. Yet in her mind, she still saw the torn letter from Percy's betrayal, a reminder that every promise could be a trap. Anne whispered to herself, "I must stay vigilant, remain true to myself." Still, she did not close her heart entirely. Whenever Henry drew near, her spirit quivered. Part of her longed for genuine love. Part remained wary of possession. That conflict made her both ice and fire, cold before sweet words, ablaze at the sight of opportunity. In secret moments, watching the king, Anne counted his breaths, studied his shifting expression, each movement mapping itself onto her soul like a complex chart. 7 years, 7 endless years. Anne held her strategy firm. The Tudor palace seemed to hear her heartbeat, strong, unyielding. The wind beyond the window felt like invisible footsteps trailing her path. Silently witnessing her extraordinary courage, Anne Boleyn had conquered not only the king, but also herself, conquering cowardice, fear, and the social prejudices against women. And then, at last, the voice within her conscience rang out like a bell, signaling a turning point. Henry no longer merely pursued her. He consented to marriage to win her. Anne's strategy had succeeded, opening the door to the power she so longed for. Yet the price of this daring game, the cost of her fiery ambition and silent inner torment, was a new chapter drenched in blood and tragedy, which we will explore in the next part. When the year 1533 finally dawned, Anne Boleyn stepped into the sunrise of her queenly life with every ounce of joy and hope. Her mind reeled with the official news. Henry VIII had agreed to marry her in secret, proclaiming her as Queen of the Tudor realm. Anne's heart thundered like waves crashing against distant cliffs. That elation seemed to lift the dark veil that had long hung over the Tower of London. She felt herself emerge like a new star on the opulent horizon of politics, confident in a future that appeared invincible. But that exhilaration swiftly gave way to an indescribable weight. Anne heard the wind outside her window hiss, reminding her that this decision could be a double-edged sword. When Henry broke with Catherine of Aragon, his companion of 20 years, and formally severed ties with the Roman papacy, Anne realized she had become the epicenter of an unprecedented religious earthquake. Monasteries across the land were dissolved and their riches seized. The Pope excommunicated Henry, and Europe turned its back, slamming diplomatic doors in her face. She felt her steps falter on the harsh battlefield of politics, like a lone warhorse separated from its herd, forced to find its own path to survival. Her coronation was a lavish spectacle that etched Anne's figure into history, a heavy crown of gold and jewels upon her head. A crimson carpet unfurled through Westminster Abbey at her feet. Every tolling bell and flickering candle in the congregation reinforced one message. She was the catalyst for the English Reformation. Yet in her heart, that crown felt like a vice tightening around her temples, pressing down on her very thoughts. She wondered, was she truly ready to bear this burden? Such doubts grew sharper, as Anne found herself not only the symbol of passion and power, but also a participant in closed-door councils where officials murmured over religious statutes, church reforms, and the division of the vast monastic wealth. She felt like a lost child in a damp, whispering forest, hearing the rustle of leaves as murmurs of distrust. Still, Anne refused to retreat. Whenever she lifted her head in those council chambers, her gaze struck like lightning in a storm. Sharp, unwavering, and full of authority. In those early days of the new reign, Anne began to involve herself in land grants, religious reforms, and the appointment of officials' roles long reserved for men. Each time she signed a decree, she felt the ink cut through her heart. On one side lay the autonomy she so desperately craved. On the other, the risk of paying with her life. The warmth of the quill's stroke seemed to ignite a silent vow. I must be braver than ever. Eduefa. Yet not all greeted the new queen with open arms. Among the populace, loyalty to Catherine of Aragon ran deep. Angry whispers echoed through market stalls and narrow streets. Anne is the betrayer of the Spanish princess. That resentment coursed like an undercurrent beneath the palace's velvet fabrics. Poised to engulf her at any moment, Anne sensed the murky mire beneath the coronation carpet, ready to swallow her whole beyond England's shores. Foreign ambassadors reported bluntly, "The Queen is hated everywhere." Those words reached her through secret letters and disdainful glances. Each one felt like a dagger to her heart, threatening to shatter her resolve. Yet that very sense of encirclement kindled her determination. She knew weakness would mean instant destruction. Anne swallowed her sorrows and transformed her pain into a quiet strength. Then came the momentous day, the 7th of September, 1533, when Anne gave birth to a daughter, whom she named Elizabeth. The hopes of a male Tudor heir vanished in the newborn's cry. In that instant, her joy was snuffed out like a candle in a gust of wind. She heard her own heart crack. Henry yearned for a son to carry on the dynasty, and she had given him a princess instead. Anne's spirit felt fractured, every beat echoing like a funeral toll. They say the infant's cry reverberated throughout the royal chambers. But to Anne, it was the knell of her grim fate. She wondered, did she still hold any value in Henry's eyes? Every time she gazed at her child, she saw her own reflection in those tiny features, both a beacon of hope and a reminder of painful failure. The surroundings, the intricately carved seats, the regal hedges of the palace gardens seemed to bow beneath her sorrow. Though the antechamber smelled of jasmine and the royal throne gleamed with crimson polish, Anne saw only a pall of doubt draped over everything. She believed that Elizabeth's sweet cries could never erase Henry's longing for a son. No amount of persuasion, she felt, could prevent her steps from slipping into a dark abyss. In the stillness of night, Anne stood by her window and gazed out across the palace. A slender crescent moon hovered overhead, its silver rays dancing on the cold stone walls. She whispered to herself, "I must overcome this pain." That vow reverberated through the chamber as though the wind itself were dispersing the heavy clouds. The faint glow crystallized into a fragile spark of hope. She would not abandon her mission, even faced with the greatest dangers. And so Anne realized that being queen and bearing a princess was not enough to secure her position. She would need much more, proof of her worth through each day of governance, through every bold decision. That burning conviction would sustain her soul in the trials we will explore in the next part. When Princess Elizabeth's cry had scarcely faded within the walls of the Tower of London, Anne Boleyn began to sense an icy chill creeping into Henry VIII's heart. The lavish gifts, honeyed love letters, and intimate banquets abruptly ceased, leaving in her a vast emptiness, like a dark, fathomless sea. The palace fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the echo of wooden heels on stone flagstones, a constant reminder that the power she once held had now slipped beyond her reach. Shadows slanted across the ramparts, staining every surface with suspicion and betrayal. Amid that night, poised on the brink of upheaval, Thomas Cromwell, the king's most powerful advisor, began to cast his net. Anne heard whispers of secret files. 5 witnesses had been interrogated, including her brother George Boleyn. all accusing her of adultery. The interrogations were hurried, sweat beading the interrogator's brows, candlelight flickering on the walls as if to wink a warning. Truth matters little, only verdicts do. Anne pictured each charge sheet, her name stamped in bold, carving into her heart like a blade. By April 1536, her cell was alive with sound, the creak of heavy locks, the soft toll of chapel bells, and the measured footsteps of guards pacing the corridors. In the tower's courtyard, the trees still whispered as if offering shelter, yet Anne only felt the cold stone pressing in, daring her to flee. Each morning, she awoke in that dim cell, imagining the hasty trial being set in motion, an already scripted drama in which she had no part. On May 2, by Saint-Chelou, amid the lively May Day festivities beyond the walls, royal forces burst in and arrested Anne. The drumbeats and cheers she had heard moments before turned into a cacophony of screams in her ears. "You are no longer queen!" One moment she had sat upon the throne. The next, she was bound and hurried back to the tower. Anne's heart clenched, and the world swirled around her like a flower caught in a storm. Beautiful, yet utterly hopeless, her trial unfolded in a stifling atmosphere. Absent the peers she had once called friends, Anne entered the courtroom under flickering candlelight, briefly recalling her first steps into Westminster Abbey. Now, the same light exposed her pale face and tightly pressed lips. When the charges of treason, adultery, and incest were pronounced, her heart skipped a beat, then thundered again like the clank of prison irons, pins driven deep into her soul. On May 15, by Saint-Chelou, her death was decreed. No appeal remained. The court resembled a macabre portrait, painted with lies as cruel brushstrokes. Anne steeled herself. "I must keep my dignity to the end." The wind in the tower's passages whispered reassurance. "Be brave." Anne, accrue, on the morning of May 19, she donned a silvery grey damask gown and ascended the scaffold with her chin held high. Her hands trembled not with fear but with the weight of history upon her shoulders. Before kneeling, she delivered her final statement in a calm yet proud voice. When the French swordsman's blade fell, Anne felt each slice part her breath, separating life as effortlessly as ash from flame. Yet before the light left her eyes, her face maintained its serene composure, as though her spirit lingered beyond flesh. In that instant after her head fell, many witnesses claimed her lips still quivered and her eyelids blinked open and closed for several seconds. Morning sunlight filtering through iron bars illuminated the pool of blood like shards of a broken mirror, both surreal and horrifying. The air trembled with ragged breaths and muffled heartbeats in the sudden silence, sending shivers through all who watched. But the tragedy did not end there. Anne Boleyn's head vanished without a trace. No wooden spike for display, no earthenware jar for preservation, nor an official grave marked the spot. Her body was hastily packed into a weathered wooden chest and buried quietly in the little chapel within the tower's precincts. The cold stones seemed to swallow every final echo. From that time on, rumours spread. Had Elizabeth I later secretly reclaimed her mother's head? Or had Cromwell hidden it as damning evidence? Each theory was like a knife twisting in Anne's memory. Even in death, nearly 500 years later, the fate of that severed head remains an unsolved mystery, an enduring reminder that power and betrayal lie but a single stroke of the sword apart. When Anne Boleyn's vessel finally cleaved the waves of the English Channel and slipped into Dover harbour, she felt an unfamiliar breath against her skin, no longer the briny scent of seafood or the fresh gusts of the sea, but the cold dampness of English mist. The entire scene seemed to moan under the weight of thick cloaks, as if to remind her that this was no gentle land of warm French dreams. With each step onto the stone quay, Anne's heart pounded in a tumult of joy at returning home, and unease at the knowledge that a wholly different life awaited her. The Tudor court greeted her with rows of slate-grey pillars and interminable corridors lit by flickering oil lamps, their glow both shimmering and chill. The incessant chirp of brown crickets blended with the palace's heavy breath, echoing through every hall. Courtiers' glance swept over Anne like invisible arrows. Each looked brimful of judgment and curiosity. She realized at once that the confidence, quick wit, and independence that had made her shine in continental courts were here weapons fraught with danger, sure to anger any high-ranking man who disliked a woman stepping beyond her bounds. Within Anne's soul, a smouldering flame longed to burst into speech. She remembered the moment she had dispatched her invitation to Henry Percy, and the thrilling misstep of her heart when she heard his reply. Percy, with those appealing eyes seeking a safe haven, had led Anne to believe that love could transcend every limit. Yet just as that spark of hope flickered to life, Cardinal Wolsey, powerful enough to rival the king himself, had appeared like a merciless sorcerer, forcing Percy to marry another. That humiliation swept over Anne like an unexpected sleet, chilling her very core. The memory of being summoned before Westminster Hall still haunted her. The solemn organ music in the great chapel had sounded like a funeral dirge, silencing her spirit. The court's ritual trappings candle, stands, velvet drap, and gleaming regalia became the backdrop for a dark tragedy. She felt dizziness wash over her when she heard the pronouncement, "Your heart, Anne, belongs only to he who holds the reins." Her hot blood froze in her veins, her pulse racing wildly beneath the silent crowd. Yet it was precisely in that moment of deepest shame that a new resolve was ignited within Anne. When night fell, and the palace corridors echoed with her solitary footsteps, the lamplight casting soft golden pools on the walls, she would sit by her window and gaze upon the desolate inner gardens. The gaunt branches reaching up into the darkness mirrored her mood, bare yet unbowed, enduring cruelty without yielding. She told herself, "If I play by another's game, I will remain a puppet forever." From that resolve, a flame of ambition and self-determination burst to life. That determination transformed Anne into the architect of her own fate. She silently mapped each step, cataloguing the nobles' whispers to discern who were friends and who were foes. Every afternoon, as the western sky turned rose-hued, she stood on her balcony, watching the sunset ripple across the rooftops. That rosy light stirred her conviction. She was no longer the obscure Boleyn girl, but a woman bold enough to defy every limit and claim her rightful place. Her plan to conquer Henry VIII, the powerful, desirous king, whom she had only dared admire from afar, began to crystallize. Anne meticulously crafted each word and gesture in their encounters, speaking with ease yet precision, meeting his gaze with quiet confidence, choosing attire that balanced regal elegance with discreet boldness. In her mind, she became an artist painting his portrait stroke by careful stroke, blending noble restraint with flashes of daring French flair. Courtly banquets evolved into arenas of rhetoric and nuance. When Henry spoke of military campaigns, she nodded thoughtfully before posing incisive questions. When his glance lingered on her Frenchy-style tea, she would deftly steer the conversation toward matters of continental culture. Each time his gaze held her beyond what protocol demanded. Her heart skipped as though sunlight seeping through a narrow window had ignited a small blaze. Yet she remained composed, biding her moment to reveal her strength. Within Anne's heart, the conflict between a yearning for genuine love and the necessity of political strategy deepened daily. She asked herself, "Can I win Henry's heart without losing myself?" Night after night, she lay on silken sheets while the hearth's embers danced vermilion patterns on the walls. Like performers awaiting their cue, the loneliness of her royal station, set against her personal ambitions, roused her in the dark to listen to her own heartbeat, echoing against the palace's pulse. At last, Anne recognized what it would take to compel Henry to kneel and swear his oath. She needed not only her beauty and intellect, but also the courage to lay down one non-negotiable condition: her status as queen before love could be consummated. This decision was like a blade severing all tangled ties, swinging open a new gateway to power. Yet deep down, she understood that stepping into queenhood would bring challenges far harsher than any she had faced. With her heart steeled and her ambition ablaze, Anne resolved to challenge every prejudice and forge her future on her own terms. From the moment Anne extinguished the last candle in the royal bedchamber, the very air of the palace seemed to slacken, as if taken aback by her declaration. In Henry VII's eyes, Anne Boleyn was unlike any mistress he had ever conquered. At the Tudor court, women typically resigned themselves to fate, living as shadows behind the throne. But Anne calmly proclaimed, "I would rather die than lose my honour." That statement rang out like thunder in an overcast sky, setting a firm boundary the king had never before encountered. In the sapphire-hued audience chamber, the yellow glow of oil lamps danced across the lofty vaulted ceiling as Henry stood in deep thought. His gaze swept over Anne not with the desire he cast upon other ladies of the court, but with a spark of wounded pride and ambition. Each time Anne staked her claim to women's agency, each determined glance from her was like a firework, igniting Henry's vanity. "I will not win her through ordinary courtesy." From that moment, his pursuit grew ever more fervent. For 7 long years, Henry loved Anne through secret letters penned on fine parchment, the ink as lustrous as fragrant oils. When night fell, Anne would sit at her ebony writing desk, the soft scratching of her quill beating across the page like a racing heartbeat. The midnight breeze stirred the letters, as if urging her to respond to each line of seduction. "None but you can enthrall me," all while she maintained her dignity. At dawn, gifts arrived from every realm. Ruby rings set with diamonds, strips of Italian silk dyed a golden hue, vials of French perfume exuding heady fragrance. Each present was a new chapter in Tudor era, lovey bombing, lavish offerings of wealth and prestige to make Anne the ultimate prize. In the grand banquet hall, under crystal chandeliers, feasts of venison dusted with ash, aged wines, and gentle music formed a sweet trap, leaving Anne intoxicated beneath an opulent canopy. Yet in her mind, each sip of wine still tasted of doubt. Will these promises endure? Often, Anne would step out onto her second-floor balcony, where walls were draped in climbing roses, and gaze at the crescent moon suspended in the sky. Silver moonlight glinted off jewel and petals, sketching the silhouette of a power struggle. In that moment, she whispered to herself, "I am not a plaything." She felt each breath of the night wind as a cheer. Be patient. Wait for your moment. That patient strategy ultimately enabled Anne to seize a secret proposal. When Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, Henry's appointee, arrived with a meticulously crafted argument for royal authority, she knew the moment had ripened. Westminster Palace fell quieter than ever as the two signed their betrothal agreement. Anne stood by a high window, watching morning light illuminate a stained glass depiction of St. Matthew, and her heart swelled with both joy and the weight of responsibility. The moment the Archbishop issued the decree of annulment, the palace held its breath. Henry, exultant as a victor, nodded in official commitment to Anne abandoning Catherine of Aragon, rejecting Rome's authority, and styling himself supreme head of the Church of England. The wind from the palace wafted through the window, carrying echoes of history. Change has come, but Anne knew full well that this union was not merely a vow of love, but a wager of a kingdom power, religion, and the future of England hanging in the balance. At last, Anne stood by the darkened balcony window, wind whipping her hair, gazing down at the garden, veiled in early morning mist. Rows of tulips shy in the dawn light seemed like the hopeful eyes of her courtiers, while sturdy rose bushes bristled like challenges awaiting her. Her heart fluttered with mingled excitement and anxiety. Her happiness was at its threshold, yet the trials ahead loomed ever larger. Anne sighed softly. closing the chapter of her first love, to step into the role of queen, the position she had yearned for through countless days and nights. And with all her pride and dignity, the flame of her ambition burned brighter, ready to illuminate the stormy path that lay before her. In January 1533, when the early spring chill still clung as dew upon the ancient oak leaves, Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII quietly exchanged marriage vows, marking a seismic rupture between the English throne and the Roman papacy. Their wedding night unfolded in the hushed chamber of Hampton Court, lit only by golden candles flickering against the cold stone walls. Anne felt her heartbeat synchronize with the candles' sputtering dance, thrilled by joy yet anxious for the uncertain future. As the heavy wooden door closed, the outside world receded, leaving only whispered oaths, mingling with the night air. By summer, Anne's coronation at Westminster Abbey had become one of the most lavish spectacles in English history. June's sunlight slanted through stained glass windows, turning coloured panes into shimmering specks upon the walls. Rows of troops paraded in the outer court, their uniforms gleaming in gold and red. The drum's thunderous beat like the nation's heartbeat. Inside the abbey, a scarlet carpet stretched like a river of triumph, guiding her toward the solid gold throne. Each step Anne took was laden with happiness and a burning worry. Will this halo of glory shield me through the coming storm? Henry's decision to break with the Roman Church and declare himself supreme head of the Church of England rent the religious sky like a whirlwind. Monasteries across the land echoed with clanging doors, their time-worn stones once hallowed by prayer, now silent in emptiness. Standing amid the ruins of a former abbey, Anne inhaled the scent of rot and sorrow, as if the very soul of the convent lay shattered. She felt both elated by her newfound power and sorrowful for the humble villagers who lost their livelihoods and spiritual havens when church lands were seized for the crown. Refusing to serve merely as courtly decoration, Anne immediately involved herself in state affairs. By lamplight, she pored over diplomatic briefs, her hand trembling only slightly as she signed each instruction, laid out before her on a map of Europe. She traced her finger along the territories of Protestant princes and murmured, "Here lies my alliance." The council fell silent as she proposed exchanging envoys, organising ceremonies at Whitehall, and even urged them to consider the once-banned Protestant tracts. Her gaze flashed like lightning in a storm authority, tempered by scholarship, and stirred uneasy admiration in the hearts of conservative courtiers. In closed council chambers, Anne advised on the appointment of officials, selecting those who shared her vision and sidelining those still loyal to Rome. Each time her quill tapped the parchment, permanently recording a name, it marked another step in her conquest of a treacherous political landscape. Yet that very tapping sounded an alarm in her soul. Every coin handed over, every decree signed, turns me into a target. And so, the court began to whisper of a heretical queen, a threat to the faith, a schemer who shattered tradition. Aye, beyond the palace walls, the populace remained steadfast in loyalty to Catherine of Aragon, praising her piety and virtue. Angry whispers drifted through the narrow lanes. Anne has destroyed the church. Anne is the source of this schism. Crowds in Cheapside paused to hurl insults, and Anne shivered at the thought that each word could pierce her back like an arrow. Every morning, as she walked past St. James's Gate, the wind tugged at her cloak as though to warn, "Queenhood is not all glory." Aye, Anne's impact reached far beyond courtly pageantry. She was the spark that ignited the English Reformation, dismantling ancient power networks. Society trembled as monasteries were dissolved. Scholars gained the right to preach Protestant theology, and crowds clamoured for freedom of conscience. Former adherents of the Roman Church wandered this new world, like leaves adrift on a river. Anne watched these upheavals with a heart swelling with pride, yet aching with doubt. I have unleashed the storm, but will it bring salvation or ruin? Within her, that same courage outlined a host of powerful enemies. The cautious glances of Cromwell, the calculating eyes of Norfolk, and the hidden intrigues of other courtiers haunted her every step. Each time Anne traversed the palace's labyrinthine corridors, the soft tap of her slippers on marble felt like a countdown. The darkness ahead could become a nightmare. Yet she reminded herself, if I do not press forward, I will collapse into the shadows. Armed with a keen mind and an unwavering flame of determination, Anne Boleyn braced herself to meet every challenge and to lead England into its tumultuous new chapter. On the 7th of September, Etienne by Saint-Chassagne, in a chamber warmed by dancing candlelight, Anne Boleyn cradled Princess Elizabeth in her arms for the first time. The newborn's tentative cry rang out like a bell heralding a new beginning. Yet deep inside Anne, joy mingled with an uneasy flutter of anxiety. The court greeted that cry with small smiles curling at the corners of noble lips. But Henry VIII Tudor's formidable sovereign betrayed no delight. He yearned for a son to secure the dynasty, and Anne had offered him only a daughter. No sooner had Elizabeth's cries echoed through the corridors than the once abundant love letters, private feasts, and lavish gifts fell silent, swallowed by a gathering darkness. Anne felt the palace hush around her, haunted only by the faint snap of hope's fracturing. In the days that followed, Anne keenly sensed Henry's footsteps receding. Each time, she crossed the cold stone floors of the corridor. Only the wind whistling through a nearby window kept her company, carrying with it the echo of indifference. Gifts that had arrived like spring showers, silk as thin as butterfly wings. Diamonds that caught the sun seemed suddenly non-existent. The grand nursery lay empty and still, a solitary cradle resting on the marble floor, reminding Anne that even a powerful throne could not protect a heart left to yearn for warmth. Loneliness seeped into her thoughts, whispering that love, even in its loftiest form, was too fragile to weather such chill. Beside her, Thomas Cromwell, the king's trusted right hand, regarded Anne with cool appraisal, as though she were a boulder, obstructing the flow of his ambition. He bristled at her efforts to forge alliances with Protestant princes, and when she urged that former monastic estates be distributed to the poor, he quietly calculated how best to divert their wealth to the royal coffers. This internal conflict steeled Cromwell's resolve to manage the removal of the Queen's power, commencing in the shadows where he wove his secret machinations. In Anne's own mind, each breeze that stirred the curtains carried rumours of 5 witnesses ready to accuse her of adultery, among them her brother George Boleyn. These baseless charges toll in her thoughts like alarm bells. Truth matters little, only accusation counts. She pictured the witnesses lined up one by one, their eyes dulled by torture and bribes, their anguish rippling through Anne's heart like a lingering wound. By April 1536, as spring waned, Anne heard the click of heavy latches opening, heralding a series of rapid interrogations. Everything took place in a silence so profound it became terrifying. Even the ancient walls of the Tower of London, steeped in centuries of history, felt fragile as a leaf trembling in the wind. Each morning she awoke to the tap-ro-tap of the guards' boots on the stone path, each echo counting down the days to her ordeal. Then on May 2, 1536, amid the clamorous May Day festivities outside the tower, royal officers stormed in and arrested Anne. The same drums and cheering that had greeted the spring rites now roared in her ears as cries of betrayal. The Queen is now a criminal! The world spun around her like a whirlwind, and she felt every cell in her body stiffen as her hands were bound. The palace that had once gleamed with royal splendour became a prison, and Anne understood that neither power nor love would shield her from the coming storm. During the swift trial, she entered a chamber lit by only a few trembling candles. Their glow cast whip-shaped shadows on the walls, reminding her of the interrogations that tormented her so-called witnesses. When the court pronounced her guilty of treason, adultery, and incest, her heart stuttered as though it might stop, then shattered into a cry of captivity. Such indescribable pain left her wondering, had there ever been a chance to triumph over this merciless destiny? On May 15, Etienne by Saint-Chassagne, The summons arrived, spelling out her final fate. Anne knew there would be no appeal. Every turn had been scripted like a savage play. In the silent moment before the verdict, she closed her eyes and imagined the first light of dawn filtering through a high window, a reminder that wherever there is daybreak, there is hope. She whispered to herself, no matter how harsh the torment, I will keep alive the flame of faith and love. On the eve of her execution, Anne sat by a narrow casement window as the last rays of sunset painted her delicate features in gold. The wind rustled through the tower's ancient trees, whispering tales of generations who had fallen before her. She saw herself as the last remaining leaf, clinging to a branch suspended between earth and sky. With every heartbeat, echoes of past and future intertwined. Fear melded with a fierce will to survive. Anne understood that the fate of her severed head might yet be hunted. But that was merely her flesh. Her soul, endowed with courage and determination, would live on in the annals of history and in the minds of all who dared challenge power. All around her, the Tower of London brooded under the dying light, its cold stones still glinting with the scars of history. As though sharing her mood, dawn and darkness could coexist. Despite the sorrow and outrage tearing at her, Anne managed a proud smile. She had thrown herself into the fray, loved deeply, and fought to her last breath. And though the whereabouts of her head may remain an unsolved enigma, Anne Boleyn's indomitable spirit will endure like a flame ablaze through the long Tudor night. At the beginning of 1536, the Tudor political landscape seemed to sag under the weight of Cromwell's meticulously woven conspiracy. Within the Tower of London, once resonant with prayers and the comforting peal of bells, now the echoes of sinister plots seemed to spill forth from every corridor. Anne Boleyn, now Queen, had yet to realize that an invisible storm was gathering over her life. Her mind remained tormented by thoughts of reforms and the seizure of monastic lands, even as the darkness of betrayal crept ever closer. From a dimly lit chamber, strewn with maps and secret dossiers, Thomas Cromwell methodically set his plan in motion. He sought out pliable witnesses and orchestrated a series of accusations designed to destroy Anne. Those called to testify a royal musician, a personal servant, and even her brother George Boleyn were carefully selected, each levelled with ludicrous charges of adultery. The irony was that, at the very moments these 5 witnesses spoke out, Anne was still either heavily pregnant or recently recovered from childbirth. But that slender thread of truth was crushed in the gears of power. In Anne's mind, the 30th of April, Etienne by Saint-Chelieu, played back like a haunting film. A grey afternoon as the tower gates clanged shut behind a court musician named Marquine. The flickering oil lamp light filtering through the bars revealed his pallid, fear-stricken face. The creak of the latch sounded like the tolling of a death knell, heralding the sobs to come. Marquine was tortured until each drop of sweat on his brow felt like an accusing tear. When his coerced confession was extracted by blows and bribes, Anne could scarcely believe that the boy who once played for her in the palace gardens would be turned into a tool of treason. Less than 3 days later, amid the boisterous May Day festivities outside the tower, where drums rolled and nobles cheered, Anne Boleyn was abruptly seized by royal agents. The scene shifted in an instant from a triumphal stage, where she had once waved to the crowd, to the cold embrace of iron shackles. Anne felt the damp wind seep through her finery, a stark reminder that thrones and glory are fragile. The revellers, convinced she was presiding over a celebration, had no inkling that the woman before them had been deprived of her liberty. The clash of shackles and the shouts of guards cut through the music of the festival, leaving Anne shaken. One moment, Queen. The next prisoner. Her trial was conducted with terrifying speed, like a machine that required no truth, only form. Anne entered the courtroom with quiet eyes, noting the candlelight flickering on the judge's brow. A cold draught from a stone-mullioned window whipped her silk gown, an unwelcome chill she had rarely known before. Outside, rumours of Cromwell's ruthless intrigue spread like a deathly breath. Before the charges were even read, Anne realised there was no valid evidence, only the coerced testimonies gleaned through violence and bribery. The judges then pronounced the 3 charges in turn: treason, adultery, and incest. Each verdict fell like the hammer of a long foreordained sentence. In Anne's heart, the pauses between each word jabbing at her like needles, she wondered if justice had ever truly existed here. When the final judgment resonated in the hall, her heart halted for an instant before bursting into the deafening clamour of imprisonment. Perhaps this, from the start, was always my fate, she thought, as though every previous step had been leading her to this dark crossroads. There were times she pictured George's face, seeing the agony he suffered when forced to testify. Family bonds twisted by Cromwell's manipulation had become weapons against his own sister. Anne understood fully now. Love and power can be separated by the thinnest of lines. The spectre of shattered trust haunted her mind, reminding her that even blood ties offered no solid refuge. On May 15, Etienne Wu by Saint-Chelou, the death sentence was formally announced in that same rush of formality. The judge looked up, his voice cold and unmoved. Anne felt a deep ache in every bone, as if the very stones of the tower were pressing down on her heart. She made no plea, uttered no cry, only locked eyes with the judge as if to dare him. "Execute my body, but you cannot extinguish my spirit." That vow rang out in the chamber, then dissolved into silence as the escort came to lead her away. In her final moments stepping into the public light, Anne Boleyn clutched her sleeve tightly, feeling a hidden tear trail down her cheek. The London wind swept through the tower's trees, each gust a mournful hymn of farewell. The assembled onlookers stood hushed, as if afraid to awaken some hidden horror in the air. Anne understood that, once her head was severed, her story would truly begin. The injustice, the scheming, and her unyielding ambition would live on in the minds of anyone brave enough to remember her name. And so the fateful moment arrived. Life's final purse was emptied, ushering in a new chapter of Anne Boleyn's tragedy. Yet behind the darkened veil of that day, her determined flame endured, lighting the way for generations to come, as an undying testament to the yearning for freedom and justice. On the morning of May 19, Etienne Wu by Saint-Chelou, the sky above the Tower of London lay heavy with a cold dawn mist, as if the earth itself were holding its breath before the unfolding of history. In a makeshift execution chamber atop the hill, Anne Boleyn prepared herself with the meticulous care of a noblewoman. She donned a gown of ashen-grey damask that shimmered faintly in the slanting sunlight filtering through the leaves, the soft silk clinging to the contours of a body that had weathered many storms. Over it, she draped a matching cloak, neatly fastened at the shoulders, lending her both dignity and grace. Her hair was not left to fall in the loose cascades of courtly festivals. Instead, it was tightly coiled and secured in careful loops, preserving the final image of a courageous queen as she faced her fate. Early sunlight wove through the window, dancing on the surface of an ebony table in scattered golden flecks. The faint scent of scented candles mingled with the damp fragrance of oak leaves outside, stirring in. And memories of childhood afternoons spent racing across sunlit French meadows. In that moment, her mind brimmed with echoes of laughter and music in palace gardens. Yet such recollections dissolved like dew beneath her resolve. And she told herself, there is no time for tears over the past. Now I must face reality. Outside, a crowd had gathered at dawn. Expressions of sorrow, curiosity, and resentment flickering across their faces. They formed 2 long lines leading to the scaffold, where crimson drapes marked the path of execution. Wind sweeping down the hillside sent banners fluttering in protest, as though even the elements objected to what would take place. The murmur of voices and the soft click of wooden clogs on stone reminded Anne of the ancient city's pulse echoing within her own heart. As she stepped onto the execution courtyard, the very air seemed to sag. The ground, still damp with nocturnal dew, clung to her feet like the final tears of the earth. Anne paused to look at the crowd, her gaze composed yet profound. She inclined her head in solemn farewell to the ephemeral glories of court, the throne, the splendour, and her grand designs unfulfilled. Observers noted that she showed no tremor of fear, only the proud serenity of a woman fully aware of her worth. The drums sounded the death knell, their steady beat echoing beneath the morning sky as the guards' footsteps fell in disciplined cadence. Anne held her back straight and clenched the folds of her sleeve to contain her emotions. With eyes half closed, she lifted her thoughts to the heavens, seeking the divine comfort she had long cherished. A blindfold was drawn over her eyes, covering much of her face yet leaving visible the elegant line of her nose and the firm set of her lips, her final silent testament to her regal poise. Before kneeling, she spoke her last words, in a voice of calm resolve. "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die. For according to the law, and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it." Hi! Those words rang out, clear and unwavering, free of bitterness or reproach. As she knelt, her back remained straight, lips softly moving in a silent prayer. While the chill wind tousled her cloak, the oak leaves beyond the scaffold rustled as though in response to her final petition, carrying both a gentle acceptance and the weight of tragedy. The earth beneath her knees felt solid and ready to receive the remainder of her mortal frame. In the next instant, the French swordsman hired by Henry VIII as a merciful alternative to the axe stepped forward in silence. He drew the long blade, its cold metal flashing in the dawn light. Anne felt the presence of that steel edge as acutely as sweat beads on her throat. Yet her mind remained as calm and clear as a mirror-flat pool. For a heartbeat, the wind stirred the branches overhead, carrying a hushed lament as the final farewell. Then, as the unforgiving blade pierced her throat, a gush of vivid red blood splashed on the stone floor. But what etched itself most indelibly in the memories of those present was not the crimson flood. It was the unbroken tranquility on Anne's face as her life slipped away. No pleading, no panic, only that ineffable serenity of a woman who understood her destiny and embraced it fully. Moments later, her body crumpled, and the afternoon sun shimmered over the bloodstain like the last fire of a fallen queen. Everything seemed to pause. The wind stilled. The leaves trembled once, then fell silent, and the crowd's tearful gasps faded into stillness. In that fleeting instant between life and death, Anne Boleyn's spirit seemed to lift on the breeze, merging with the vast expanse of sky and cloud. The entire tower, its ancient oaks, its honey-coloured stones warmed by the sun, felt as though it too had listened and taken note. None who witnessed that scene could ever forget it. The image of a woman facing the blade with unwavering composure, her soul soaring like a kite against the heavens, defying the gravity of the mortal world. And in the hush of that May afternoon, only her footprints remained upon the wooden scaffold, a final imprint of a royal tragedy, yet also the mark of indomitable pride. From that moment on, the story of Anne Boleyn transcended the mere account of an executed queen. It became the legend of a spirit's enduring strength and the fierce desire to live fully, even into one last radiant moment of triumph. Immediately after the cold stroke of the blade, the scaffold fell eerily silent. A breeze swept down from the hillside, carrying with it the ashes of the death drum's echoes, weaving them into a sombre symphony. In that moment, many witnesses insisted that Anne Boleyn's eyes remained open. Her lids did not close permanently, as though her soul lingered in the world of the living. The guards, shoulders hunched and hearts pounding, dared not approach the scaffold, but stood silently, watching. Then, Suddenly, those same lids fluttered shut and opened again several times, as if bidding farewell to the last rays of light. Her delicate lips, once the heralds of triumph, still trembled ever so slightly, as though striving to utter some final word. Under the dappled morning sun filtering through oak leaves, the fresh blood on her cheeks even seemed to quiver, contracting with each faint breath, compelling every bystander to take an involuntary step back. Modern medicine might explain these phenomena as mere nerve reflex reactions occurring after central consciousness has ceased, nerve fibers still firing as the brain goes dark. But in the 16th century, long before science could demystify such events, these signs were deemed supernatural portents, messages from the other side, not yet fully spoken. Many courtiers and soldiers, kneeling in reverence around the scaffold, shivered with goosebumps. They whispered among the silent trees. Could some divine power be intervening? The murmur spread swiftly through the execution yard, like waves crashing onto shore, igniting a surge of fear and fascination. They speculated that perhaps Anne had attempted to reveal some critical secret that went unspoken, some curse, or a world-shattering truth about the treason behind her downfall. Sunlight glimmered on the dew-wet grass, elongating the shadows of the onlookers as if dragging out their dread. For an instant, the entire field seemed frozen in time. Birds fell silent. The cattle paused mid-graze, and the entire meadow held its breath in anticipation of a hidden miracle. The coppery tang of blood mingled with the green scent of grass, so suffocating that all felt it press upon their lungs. To their eyes, the pool of blood on the weathered wooden scaffold throbbed like a slow, mechanical heartbeat, startling everyone who glimpsed it. Indeed, the tale of the Queen's final movements rapidly became an endless subject of embellishment. Nobles whispered behind cathedral gates. Merchants exchanged hushed versions in the marketplace. And even foreign envoys, having caught wind of it, regarded the story with awe and caution. They judged. If Anne tried to speak, it must have been something unspeakable. Surely she knew of some conspiracy no one else has unearthed. And thus, the mystery of her severed head deepened. No one ever saw it displayed or interred in the usual manner. It seemed to vanish into nothingness, leaving the crowd bewildered and fueling rumours of some hidden mind or ultimate secret housed within. Those who had once seethed at her boldness now looked back in horror, wondering how many truths had been buried in their imaginations. Anne, though gone, lived on as an imposing spectre, straddling two worlds. They envisioned whispered pleas drifting from beyond the gates. "Hear me, O righteous ones." Yet no one possessed the courage to pry open their own eyes in search of answers. Instead, they only listened to the mysterious wind sighing through the ancient stone arches. The rumours grew more elaborate. Some claimed to have seen Anne's eyes pivot toward the crowd, as if challenging any soul who cheered her downfall. Others swore that the fresh blood on her cheeks glowed with a stubborn spark of life, refusing to be extinguished. Gradually, the scaffold became more than an execution site. It became a haunted arena where the line between life and death was so fine that a single leftover heartbeat seemed miraculous. Amid these whispers, court officials began to silence themselves, warily reminding one another, "Do not let ears deceive you. Yet do not ignore what you see." Even those at the apex of power who had once championed her trial now kept their distance. Unwilling to risk entanglement in the curse of a woman who had paid with her life, the palace temporarily suspended all ceremonies, leaving only the rustle of leaves and lone footsteps echoing through its empty corridors. Fear and curiosity swelled further as the news spread across London. Tales circulated that Anne's spirit still wandered the tower's ramparts, seeking to guard her mysterious head or to reveal the unspoken truth to some chosen soul. Speculations ran wild. Perhaps Henry VIII himself had ordered its concealment, or Cromwell kept it as damning evidence against unseen forces. No one knew the reality. only that the stories spread like wildfire through dry brush. Within each witness's heart, that haunting sensation transcended the mere death of a queen, calling to something immeasurable in the human spirit. The words unspoken, the secret never unveiled. None could hide the tremor in their voices when they recounted. Her eyes still opened, her lips still flickered. Those phrases became a nightly incantation, shedding half dreams, half-waking visions of tragedy never to fade. And so the scaffold where Anne Boleyn's earthly existence came to an end was enshrined as a legend of power and betrayal, proving that even in death, one can leave an indelible mark. Those final reflexive movements on her face, though merely the last gasps of a mortal body, were woven into legend. It was said that when night fell, the winds around the tower carried the soft susurrus of lips that had never fully been silenced, hints of truths unsaid, living on forever in the minds of those bold enough to remember her name. Immediately after Anne Boleyn's body was laid into a crude wooden coffin, the ancient stones of the chapel of St. Two, Peter Advincula seemed more silent than ever. The feeble candlelight on the altar flickered mournfully, as if sighing for the tragic fate of a queen who had once shone so brightly upon the throne. There was no severed head hoisted on a spike like those of other traitors. No perfumed incense to mask decay. Only the damp, musty air and the echo of hurried footsteps. Under the uneven arches of the vaulted ceiling, the battered coffin containing her remains was tucked into a shadowed corner, as though a secret had been buried deep within the earth. When the chapel door slammed shut, its wooden panels sounded like a silent sob of history. Around it, mossy-covered tombstones lined the walls, each carved with the names of souls who had perished in service or mischance. Yet beneath those stones, Anne was accorded only a common grave, no stately coffin draped in velvet, no carved effigy to mark her passing, a clear sign that Henry VIII intended to erase all trace of her. Within the chapel's nave, shafts of morning light, streaming through stained glass windows, painted the damp stone floor with trembling patches of colour, reflecting the mood of the holy sanctuary, a measure of sorrow, yet compelled into silence. Yet strangely, even as Anne's body lay undisturbed in its humble tomb, rumours of her missing head refused to stay buried in the deserted corridors. Some claimed to have seen a cloaked figure slip into the chapel under cover of darkness, bearing away an old wooden chest from her place of interment. Others whispered that it was the Queen's own spirit guiding the conspirators, demanding the surrender of her head as the final proof of a vast, hidden plot. According to legend, the chest was not cast into the Thames like some unknown corpse. Instead, it was carried to a secret location known only to those who had planned her downfall. The hushed chatter echoing through the royal palace's grand halls reverberated in the hearts of the watchmen. Surely Cromwell keeps it as his ultimate evidence. One guard confided to another, or perhaps Henry himself ordered it hidden, to prevent anyone from uncovering the truth. They exchanged wary glances. For if that head were ever revealed, every scheme would be exposed. In their eyes, fear etched itself as an unhealing scar. On the southern slope of the tower, dusk descended and bathed the chapel's ruins in a golden glow. A chill wind whistled through a narrow slit in the roof, setting the ancient tiles humming like a taunt to the wild tales spreading among the populace. With each sunset, Londoners would look up at the tower's turrets, wondering if Anne Boleyn's ghost drifted through its lonely corridors, seeking to impart one last portent before vanishing forever. Amid this anxious blend of dread and curiosity, many nobles grew genuinely afraid. None dared be certain they would not be the next victim crushed beneath the wheel of power. They sat in silence at evening banquets, speaking only in hushed tones when court musicians played, their eyes avoiding one another as though a single glance might betray their complicity. Heavy doors and long, empty hallways continued to guard the secret, yet the rumours proved impossible to contain. Over time, the stories of Anne's head and her final motions became ever more fantastical. Some claimed that each year on the anniversary of her death, the wind would stir the candles in the chapel, and the soft whisper, "Seek the truth," would drift through the shadows. Others insisted they heard faint pleas rising from beneath the earth, as though Anne herself was still striving to accuse her betrayers. The suffocating silence of the Tudor court only stoked the flames of these wild speculations. No official dispatch. No public statement was ever issued. Henry VIII sealed his lips. Cromwell averted the public gaze, and the entire machinery of power sank into the darkness of undisclosed secrets. With each footstep across the tower's ancient threshold, officials felt themselves ensnared in a delicate web. One misstep could plunge them into the same abyss. Thus, the scaffold, staining the tower with Anne Boleyn's blood, came to symbolize the grim silence of authority, where higher-ranking minds could spin secret circles and leave questions hanging in mid-air. In the hearts of every soldier, every noble, and every commoner, the tale of the head that was never displayed lingered as a haunting refrain, even when the body yields to the sword. The truth waits undisturbed, and the deepest buried secrets often prove to be the most potent of all. When Elizabeth I ascended the throne, whispered rumours spread of a clandestine ritual held by flickering candlelight in the private chambers of Whitehall, attended only by her most trusted confidants. It was said that on that night, Elizabeth, now the mighty queen, secretly had a weathered wooden chest, reputed to contain her mother's severed head, carried into the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. Outside, the solemn stone gates and the ancient vaulted arches seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the sacred moment. A breeze rustled down the hillside as if murmuring, "Reunite mother and daughter, before it is too late." Elizabeth, her heart still aching with a daughter's longing, is said to have knelt before the makeshift tomb and, hands trembling, opened the chest. There was no ornate monument, only the unsteady glow of candlelight on the cloth-draped box illuminating her solemn expression. In her mind echoed memories of her mother's laughter at the window and her resolute gaze in the face of every storm. Now, beneath the majestic stone vaults, Elizabeth quietly whispered, "Mother, at last I have found you." The very notion of this rite astounded many, for it flew in the face of royal custom. There was no guest list, no official record, and nothing in the court chronicles to acknowledge its occurrence. Only the shadowed walls bore witness, and the silent stones seemed to understand the night's miracle. Those present later claimed that Elizabeth knelt beside the simple coffin, spoke a brief prayer, and then placed her mother's severed head alongside her body, as though restoring the last sacred bond. Yet no document in the royal archives confirms this ceremony. All official records remain silent or have been expunged. The palace doors were swiftly sealed, and cold draughts sighed through empty corridors. None of those who observed the chest being borne away toward the crypt dared to recount the event clearly. Elizabeth, with supreme authority, had both the means and the motive to orchestrate every detail in secrecy, knowing that if word ever leaked, the entire court would convulse. A very different theory points instead to Thomas Cromwell or one of his trusted lieutenants. According to this account, Cromwell himself secured Anne Boleyn's head immediately after her execution, intending to retain the dark evidence to manipulate the future monarchy. In a dimly lit room strewn with maps and secret dossiers, that battered wooden chest became an instrument of power, first to condemn, then to hold the fate of any who threatened the throne. By the 19th century, when Queen Victoria ordered repairs to the Chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, workmen reportedly uncovered a small skeleton mingled with rubble beneath the floor. The bones, including a petite skull, resembled those of a child or a small woman. Face down in the earth, the labourers hastily reburied the remains, for no one claimed authority to examine the find. The science of the era could not determine whether it was Anne Boleyn's, but the rumour leapt through London, Did Victoria conceal the royal mummy? Today, though forensic science has advanced, proving that skeleton belonged to Anne remains an unresolved historical problem. The DNA is long degraded, the sample too damaged, and there is no clear link to any known Boleyn family remains. In sterile laboratories, test tubes tumble and whir, but the figures they produce remain cold and inconclusive. History remains silent, and the mystery drifts between theory and fact. On the southern slope of the tower, dusk falls and bathes the chapel's roof in rose-gold light. A chill wind whistles through the iron-barred window, as if issuing a challenge. Seek the truth. Rare visitors passing the sanctuary describe a shiver, as though an unseen hand brushed their shoulder, stirring forgotten sorrow. Mossy headstones seem to tremble, echoing a long-buried secret awaiting revelation. Driven by nostalgic intrigue, scholars quietly probe for clues. They inspect the crypt, examine each fallen slab, hoping to spot traces of that wooden chest. Yet every step back through time leads them deeper into a labyrinth of hidden secrets where records have been altered. Witnesses have become legend, and whispered voices mingle with the cold night wind. In every heart burns the same longing, that one day the mother-daughter reunion will lift the veil on mysteries of power. Maternal love and unspoken ambition, whether Elizabeth, the sovereign of England, Cromwell, the ruthless architect behind the throne, or Victoria, the monarch fascinated by the past. They share the same unanswered question: where does Anne Boleyn's head truly lie? And what secret did it carry? And might the Queen's restless spirit one day find complete rest? The tragedy is not yet finished. It still echoes in the cold breezes stirring through the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. Every stone and iron window frame seems to guard an untold secret. They say that if one listens closely at night, one can hear the Queen's unfettered lips whisper, "Find me, whole." And so the legend of Anne Boleyn endures not merely as a tale of death, but as a symbol of the enduring quest for justice and truth that no power can ever bury. Even though the fate of Anne Boleyn's head remains shrouded in mystery, her legacy transcends every legend or rumour. From the faint outlines of her judgment to the mists of history, Anne ignited the flame of the English Reformation and laid the groundwork for her daughter Elizabeth I's resplendent reign. In her mind's eye, England was once a narrow, confining land, but from that soil she sowed the seeds of a golden age, one in which culture, science, and female authority would flourish brilliantly. Whenever dusk falls over the Thames, it seems Anne's last light still echoes somewhere, guiding a new era. Anne's heritage extends far beyond religious or political reforms. It is a testament to the inner strength and courage of a woman who dared to defy her destiny. She stood amid the most ruthless political intrigues, tasted the bitterness of false accusation and profound loss, yet never once surrendered. Anne's spirit was like a precious gem, struck and polished by adversity until it shone more brightly and endured more steadfastly. Even as time's currents sweep all things away, that gem's radiance never fades, continuing to illuminate the minds of all who yearn for freedom. Nearly 5 centuries have passed, yet Anne Boleyn's name remains deeply etched in history books and the hearts of those who love the past. Many believe her ghost still wanders the sombre towers of London, silently surveying the city she dreamed, would know religious liberty and female power. When night falls, some say they hear a whisper, "Rise up," drifting from ancient stone windows, as if calling future generations not to remain silent in the face of injustice. Though the winds may erase every sign, Anne's spirit endures in the murmurs that stir each moss-grown brick. The stage of history cannot conceal her brilliance. Stories tell of clear moon nights when Anne's figure glides along the tower's corridors, her steps light yet unwavering, like a silver ribbon in the dark. She feared neither the cold stone walls nor the clank of her own restraints. On the contrary, those very places bore witness to her fierce will to live and her unbowed resolve. In the eyes of all who thirst for freedom, Anne became an emblem of faith and an undying flame. The tale of her missing head continues to captivate scholars and readers across continents. They hunt for clues in ancient manuscripts and in chronicles that nearly went unrecorded, all to discover the truth. But perhaps it is the wildness of the mystery itself that is most precious. It reminds us that even when a body crumbles, a person's spirit may endure forever, wandering along the thin line between history and legend. And that hand which dared to challenge prejudice will forever inspire those who refuse to hide. On London's bustling streets, passers-by dream of power and glory, yet who among them has the courage to pay the price that Anne paid? She teaches us that true power is not born of the throne or fleeting honour, but springs from steadfast fidelity to one's convictions, from daring to speak truth amid endless schemes. Ask yourself, through the dust of time, how many lives have matched her courage? Even today, Tudor museums and exhibitions display her portraits, her letters, and the jewellery entwined with her name. Each artifact bears the imprint of her life: the golden glimmer of an engagement ring, the black ink of a royal dispatch, the French silk still embroidered with handy-stitched flowers. They cannot fully capture her soul, but whenever a visitor gently touches them, they feel an electric surge of drama, an electric current of power, culture, and female ambition. In our postmodern world, Anne Boleyn appears in films, novels, and scholarly works. Some view her as a tragic victim of brutal political machinations. Others praise her as a goddess of power, a catalyst for historical change. In every interpretation, all agree that Anne was more than a historical figure. She was a living symbol of the struggle between authority and freedom, between tradition and innovation. Finally, the real secret may not lie in her head or her body, but in the immortal message Anne Boleyn left behind. The greatest power is not a sacred relic, but the ability to transform oneself and the world around, to dare to stand, to dare to challenge, to dare to pay the price. This is the enduring legacy of a woman who became a legend. When we look back upon the ruins of the past, let us listen for Anne's whisper amid the wind and falling leaves. Be courageous, so that truth is never buried. I